Greetings everyone, welcome back to this very special video. For this is the day that I have turned 24, the day of my birthday. And like every year, here's my annual Q&A video for you all. But before I get started, thank you everyone who have paused for a moment to ask me a question for this video. These questions look really fun to answer, and I can't wait to answer them for you all. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Our first question comes from Likha Luna. I hope I pronounced that name right, I'm sorry. Expect that to happen throughout the video. But she asks, what's your favorite cake flavor? Well, that'd be carrot cake. Chocolate cake is a bit too much for me, and vanilla cake is bland, something boring. However, with carrot cake, I think it has enough sweetness for me to have almost any day. Whereas I think chocolate cake is, again, a bit too much. But carrot cake is soft, it's sweet, and yeah, that's the cake that I have every year for my birthday because I like it that much. A simple answer for a simple question. And thank you, Luna, for asking me this. Our next question comes from Momamo. What's your favorite Horus Heresy book? Yeah, that's the thing. My library of Horus Heresy books is absolutely small. Like, I'm nowhere close to finishing the series, and I don't even think I can say I've really started the series. Like, I read the first few books, but you could say that I'm nowhere close to, like, say, all the library of books that everyone else has read, because again, mine is absolutely small. Because I stopped by the book Fulgrim, and I was going to go back into it, but that's been a few years already, and yeah, the Horus Heresy library is humongous, and I don't think that's a series that I'll be finishing anytime soon. But I will say, for my favorite Horus Heresy book would actually be Fulgrim. Now guys, I have heard a few opinions about Fulgrim's corruption and the criticism that came from it, but what I especially like about it is seeing the culture of the pre-heresy Emperor's Children. I thought it was quite interesting. And I thought it was interesting to see who Fulgrim was before he became a demon Primarch. And anything, I kinda liked his character. Almost reminds me of Griffith from Berserk in a way. But most likely, when I read more books, I'll probably change my opinion down the line. But anyways, thank you Momamo. Our next question comes from Lord Inquisitor Ineptus Astartes. If you could design your own 40k or AOS miniature, what would you go for? Now this is a fun question. I think for here I'll pick both settings, just for the fun of it. For 40k, I think what would be a really cool model to see would be a new model of Asphodel Effect. If that's how you pronounce his name right, I always stumble at that name. But yeah, I think a new model of him would be really cool. You know, something like his old model, but updated, of course. Something to make it grand, titanic in a way. Sort of like what Games Workshop has done for the Silent King and his model. And in a way, I think it'll be a cool centerpiece for any Drukhari army. Again, I think a new model of that would be something, a sight to behold. Something really cool to see. As for AOS, I would like to see a model of Tyrion. Tyrion of the once High Elves, now the Lumineth Realm Lords. Because you know, if his twin brother has a model, he should have one. You can't have a Yang without a Yang, or a Batman and Robin in this case. But it depends on who you imagine who's Batman, who's Robin in this case. Wells Teclis is that mage god, and you know, his model sort of shows that with him like hovering over the battlefield with his Sphinx-like creature with him. I think Tyrion needs like some sort of mount, something to ride upon like a traditional warrior would. Because you know, he is the warrior of the two. He's the warrior, Teclis is the mage. A model of Tyrion, again, would be something to see. Something cool. Something incredible, I think. But yeah, thank you for the question, Lord Inquisitor. That was a fun question to answer. Thank you, good sir. Our next question comes from Marshall Helbrecht, who asks, you are selected to choose which character or faction will get a book series from Black Library. Which character or faction would you select? Space Marine Chapter, Guard Regiment, Craft World, etc. Now, keeping this question and relate to 40k from the examples he has provided, I think I would like to see a book series on Lilith from the Drukhari. Because, here's the thing. I wanted to learn more about the character. And when I asked around if there was some kind of book that I could read where I can learn about her, I was kind of disappointed to learn that there was no book. So yeah, what I would like to see down the line is maybe a book trilogy on Lilith. Sort of like what Games Workshop has done for Mephiston or Fabius Bile. Characters having a book trilogy. That's something I would like to see out of Lilith. Maybe we can see her in her current adventures in the 4K setting. Maybe we're seeing her in the days of being a witch. I would like to see something like that. I think that'll be a neat way to explore the character. But at the end, it's Games Workshop's call. But I'm hoping they answer this call because she is an interesting character. And someone like me would like to learn more about her. Our next question comes from the Smashing Badger, who asks, what would your dream Warhammer 40k video game be, and who would you want to make it? Now, like with the Lord Inquisitor, this is a fun question. Now, with all honesty, if the Insomniac team who made the Resistance games were to make a 40k game, I think that'd be something cool to see. Now, here's the thing too. In the back of my mind, I actually have a little visual, let's say, for what would be a very cool 40k game would be. And this game being heavily inspired from the Resistance games from Insomniac. A first-person shooters game, you're with a wall of soldiers trying to fight the enemy. And I think the gameplay style for my 40k game would be something like Resistance 1, in which you are, for some parts in the game, with a wall of soldiers fighting the enemy. That's something I think would be fitting for a faction, say the Imperial Guard, who will be the starting faction for this game, of course. Again, you're a wall of soldiers charging the enemy line, and the enemy choice for here being, I think would be cool to see, being the Necrons. Now, if this video game also had the sort of upgrade style that Resistance 3 had, I think that would be something cool to do. The more time you use your weapons on an enemy, the more experience points you get for it. And with enough experience points, the weapon gets an upgrade. Because something like that I found really fun to do in Resistance 3. So yeah, combine the wall of soldiers of Resistance 1 with the upgrade system of Resistance 3. And give it the 40k aesthetic. I think that will make a very, very awesome video game. However, I'm not a video game director, and I don't think this sort of video game idea will ever happen. But it is a fun visual though, and it's something that I can daydream about. But thank you, Badger, for asking me this. This was a fun question to answer. Thank you, dude. Our next question comes from Blitzkrieg Inquisitor, who asks, will Gotrek and Felix survive in 40k? Well, I sort of already made a video like this, or more specifically a video on Gotrek. Though, looking back on it, that is a sort of video about how Gotrek would land in 40k setting, and how he could integrate in such a universe. Though I think Gotrek would survive because, well, even though he is a brute, he's not stupid. Like, he'll quickly know about guns and all that. So he's not going to charge like a line of orcs knowing that they have such weapons with them. Because, being torn to shreds by gunfire isn't a proper death for a slayer. So I think he'll survive for a time. Though, the 40k universe has to give it its all if they want to destroy the dwarf. As for Felix, well, like with Gotrek, considering all the nightmares and terrors that tried to kill him in the fantasy universe, from Skaven to a bloodthirster to a dragon, I think he'll adapt to the 40k setting. Like, I think he'll learn how to fight differently, he'll learn how to use guns, and as long as he's with Gotrek, I think he'll make it. Maybe this will be a video I should do down the line about how Felix would integrate into this setting, kind of like what I did with Gotrek. But that's a huge maybe for me. But thank you, Blitzkrieg. Thank you for the question. Next up is a question from Palladis, who asks, what got you into wanting to create the kind of content that you do? And what is the origins of the Space Brain with a hat persona? Well, as for the question about what got me into making this sort of content, well, long before I had a YouTube channel, I actually had a blog, and with this blog I would use it to tell my thoughts on things, though I would mostly use it for stuff like writing, because at the time I wanted to be a professional writer. So I thought about using this blog as a sort of home base, let's say. A website to introduce myself, and for a potential agent to see who I am. And with that, I would have a blog. Blogs about writing and the sort of book I'm creating. And later on I decided that, why don't I start making blogs about Warhammer, because I really like that kind of stuff, and I think making blogs on it would be something fun to do. Still though, I would have no viewers or even commenters on the blog, so I thought, well, why don't I adapt, try something new? And I thought, well, I always wanted to make a YouTube channel, so why don't you try making YouTube videos about this kind of stuff? Make YouTube videos about what you like and what you want to share your opinions on. And so I went with that. I decided to make a YouTube channel to share my thoughts on stuff. Originally on writing, but as you can tell, I decided to stick with Warhammer, because I find talking about that kind of stuff a lot more exciting than books. I like to share my views and opinions on all things Warhammer, sharing my views on models, the setting, the hobby. I really like doing that kind of stuff. And I'm glad I decided to take that direction, because I'm liking this channel and I'm proud of the direction that I took it. I'll keep making content and do everything in my power to provide a good show for everyone. As for the question about where I got my Space Marine hat persona, when I was thinking about who would be a representation of me in video form, when I was trying to decide which faction I would pick, I knew it would be a Space Marine because, well, that was my very first faction, and in a way, I have a more personal connection with my original Space Marine army than I did with an established chapter. So, of course, my avatar would be a Space Marine with my color scheme. Of course. But as for the hats, as for the fedora, I wanted to do a sort of, maybe not parody, but I sort of wanted to follow on the joke on the online skeptic. The online skeptic being the fedora wearing lad who is a skeptic on the establishment. The person who isn't afraid to ask questions. But less on the neckbeard side for this character at least. Yeah, so I decided to pick up the fedora from the online meme and put onto my Space Marine. Make him a skeptic Marine. And with that, thank you Palladis for asking me this question. Thank you so much, dude. And thank you for the birthday wish. Our next question comes from Rivet Gabo, who asks, do you get a laugh or cringe when people try to fight you with meme lore or over actual lore? Well, when it comes to arguments or a discourse about 40k lore or AOS lore, at least when we're talking about actual lore, at least we're somewhat using material. At least we're saying, well, in this book or in this codex it says this or this. At least we're sourcing our information. But when it comes to people or arguing over like meme lore, I think that's annoying. Like, not cringe, but I think it's like, Magnus might have not done anything wrong, but he sure hasn't done anything right either. So while it's not cringe, I find that annoying, or at least to me. There comes a point where you're just like rolling your eyes at that because you heard the joke so many times over. It's like, guys, think of something original, please. But thank you, Rivet, for the question. Our next question comes from Spitfire Gaming, who asks, who was more to blame for the War of the Beard? Now, I have an idea on what this war was from what the War of the Beard was about, and I have heard the stories about how it could have started, but without doing any complex homework on this, I think who would be more to blame from the example he has provided would be the unhinged dwarf king. Because, sometimes war happens because of the choices of one individual. And because of how stubborn and how unhinged dwarves can be when they're interacting with other races, I think the blame was on the king, on his end. Because, kings dooming themselves is a story as old as time. Stuff like that has ruined kingdoms time and time again. So I wouldn't be surprised if the fall of the dwarves would be because of the choices of this dwarf king. Though I would change my mind if I were to actually take a look at this lore. But thanks you for the question, Spitfire. Our next question comes from Lady Spookaria, who asks, who is your favorite Warhammer character of all time? Without a second thought, it would be Commander Farsight. I talk about him relentlessly through videos, I talk about him constantly on Twitter, I really enjoyed his books, I always recommend a new model for the character, and despite all the Space Marine characters that Games Workshop put front and center, I think Commander Farsight has the title for my favorite character from 40k, and perhaps Warhammer in general. So yeah, thank you Spookaria for your question. And our last question is actually multiple questions from Tutnik, who asks, what is your favorite video this last year? Ooh, that's a really tough one. Man, that is really a tough one. Well, I think my favorite video out of this year would be something out of Hell of a Boss. Which episode? Well, I don't know. I like almost every episode. And any episode that would come out this year would probably be my favorite video that has come out of YouTube this year. I really like the animations, I like the characters, and it's something charming. It's a jewel in the YouTube crown in a way. Hopefully that answers one of your questions. But the next question that you would ask would be, if you could pick one book from Black Library, which one would be your favorite? Well, I think that would be Skaven Slayer. What I really like about that book is that, this is going to sound silly, but the villains, they truly remind me of a Saturday morning cartoon. They always glorify themselves as being these perfect Skaven within society, and when something goes wrong, they always blame their fault on someone else. It's like, even if they knew they'd done something wrong, they always do these mental gymnastics about, wait, no, it's not my fault, it's their fault. Now, even though it's pen and paper, you've messed up, you've done something wrong, they always find an excuse, maybe not even purposely, on why it's not their fault and why it might be their colleague's fault. I really enjoy listening to that sort of dialogue. It's really charming for me. And also, I think we got to see more of the human side of Felix. We get to see him interact with his brother. We get to see more of his thoughts on the society that is the Empire, from his thoughts on the high class and low class, considering that he has lived both classes. I enjoyed reading his philosophy on things and his views. I think it made him a really human character. The character I want to follow more on, and read more of his thoughts on things, because he has interesting things to say. But yeah, I think the spotlight of that book could be the Skaven, because they are absolutely perfect sort of villains. They're an evilness, not to a point where they're like Shadow the Hedgehog or anything like that. I think the writer sort of knew that these kind of characters aren't to be taken so seriously, and he made the Skaven something really fun to follow. So yeah, I think my favorite Black Library book would be Skaven Slayer, because of how often I return to the book, just so I can read the interactions. The third question that Junik would actually ask would be, which Black Library book would you rather were never written? Man, that's a tough one. Well, I don't think I can really answer this one, because I don't think I've read one yet where I was like, you know what, I would prefer if this never existed because I didn't have a great time with it. I don't think I've reached a point yet where I can really answer a question like this, because I have yet to read a book that made me hate it, because at least with Black Library, at least they have a sort of quality control in my point of view. But that is my opinion on the end. And maybe there's that one bad book somewhere that I have yet to read, and if I were to read it, I would say it would be that book in this sort of question. His next question being, if you could, what would you ask the real God Emperor of mankind about? Well, the question that I would ask him would be, how does it feel to understand why people are afraid of death? But why am I saying this? Well, considering how in the last church, considering how he would ask the priest the question of, well, if people go to heaven, why would people be afraid of death? Why wouldn't you be happy about it? In the video form, he would go something along the lines of, if you can't understand why human beings would be afraid of death, then you are a fool. Saying that if you just can't understand why people might be afraid of drawing their last breath and not being part of this world anymore, something that is just natural for human beings to be afraid of, then I think you asking us that is more like you not understanding humanity. And in a way, now that the Emperor is this corpse upon a throne almost nearing his death, how it's just inevitable at this point, I think I would ask him, do you understand now why people are afraid of death, Mr. Emperor? Someone who has probably never suffered plague, disease, or had to worry about aging to the point of dying in his entire life, considering how long he has lived. I think I can ask him at this point, do you feel mortal now? Do you understand why mortals are afraid of the Grim Reaper? But his last question would actually be, what would you rather live? Martin 40k, 7th edition, or Unification era Terra? Now when he has asked about Martin 40k 7th edition, that would be before the 40k Saint has undergone the Great Rift, before the galaxy was split in two. The Imperium wasn't not really in a great state before even the Great Rift of 8th edition, so it fits along the tagline of, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. So yeah, I think I would want to live in the Unification era Terra, because despite Terra being a sort of Mad Max sort of thing, despite it being a sort of desert wasteland for the most part, at least the planet at the time was healing. The humans at the time were gathering together to try to start over again. Something like, okay, this has happened, let's try to live again. Let's try to strap our boots on for something our ancestors have created for us. And yes, this was still a time of war, and this was the time the Emperor revealed his custodians and the Thunder Warriors and was moving across the earth to unify all the human nations. At least at the time, Earth was healing. It wasn't a paradise, that's for sure, and it's probably something no one really wants to experience, but again, at least it was healing. And it would be far from the hellside that would come later. It'll be far from what Terra would become in the 40th millennium. And with that, thank you, J-Nick, for asking me these questions. I certainly had fun answering these ones. Thanks a lot, man. And with all that, we have answered all of the questions. Or at least the questions that I've decided to answer for this video, at least. And guys, all I have to say is, thank you to everyone who has paused for a moment to ask me a question, and thank you to every single one of you for the birthday wishes. They have absolutely floored me, and it reminds me why I like making these videos. However, with all said and done, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you sometime down the line with a brand new video. Have a good day, everybody.